Hello, everybody. I'm George Anderson, chair of the Conservancy for the Parthenon and Centennial Park, and just want to welcome everyone here today. Before we get started, I did want to acknowledge a few of our distinguished guests. Our Parks Director, Roy Wilson, over here. Councilman Ronnie Stein. Where'd you go, Ronnie? Back here. Councilman Keith Durbin. Thanks for coming. I first want to introduce the chair of the Metro Parks Board, Stan Fossick. Stan has served on the board for 18 years, and this is his fourth time chairing the board. Stan?
Thank you, George. Mayor Dean and distinguished guests. I'll make this short because I know everyone's cold, but this city is richly blessed with a wonderful park system that has been a major catalyst for much of the greening of Nashville. It is quite appropriate that we are here today in this location to acknowledge and celebrate Centennial Park's newly acquired status on the official National Registry of Historic Places. Authorized under the Historic Preservation Act of 1966, the National Register is part of a national program that coordinates public and private efforts to identify and protect our historic and archaeological resources. The National Register is administered by the National Park Service, which is part of the U.S. Department of Interior. Centennial Park follows an impressive list of Nashville's facilities on the National Register. The Parthenon was the first facility to be listed in 1972, followed by Warner Parks, Fort Negley, Sunnyside and Sevier Park, and Two Rivers Mansion. Home of the Centennial Exposition celebrating Tennessee's admission to the Union, Centennial Park created a cultural renaissance for Nashvillians, for Tennesseans, America, and literally visitors from around the world. It stands today as one of the most creative designs ever established in a Tennessee landscape, and it encompasses the history, culture, and beauty of Nashville. All who are affiliated with this park and with Metro Parks and Recreation hope that our efforts to preserve, protect, and expand our parks and green spaces will have a significant impact now and long, long, long into the future. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stan. Before we continue, it took a lot of time and effort to put together the application and documentation for us to receive this designation, and a special thanks goes to our board member, Franny Corzine, who headed that up and did a fantastic job. Many hours went into this preparation. And I was standing here under this monument of John Thomas. It's very appropriate. We have some family members of John Thomas here today. Andrew Bird, Ben Bird, and Evelyn Blackman. I really appreciate y'all coming and joining us here today. Now it's my honor to introduce Mayor Karl Dean. Mayor Dean is extremely supportive of what we do here at the Conservancy. He can be found at many of our lectures and events, and in the past I know he's jogged and logged many miles in this park. So he's a user of the facilities and a great supporter, and we appreciate that a lot. Mayor Dean.
Thank you. Thank you, George, and good afternoon, and thank you for being here. It's a great group, and I wanted to acknowledge our juvenile court clerk, Vic Lineweaver, who is here with us. This is a great day to be in Centennial Park, the heart of our city's park system, and I hope all of you are just as excited as I am when I heard that this park was rightfully being placed on the National Register of Historic Places. As you know, this park was home to the Centennial Exposition of 1897, a 6-month event that brought nearly 2 million visitors to Nashville at a time when the city's population was only about 100,000. The monument we are standing at today is in honor of John Thomas, president of the Nashville-Chattanooga-St. Louis Railway for 48 years and president of the Centennial Exposition. The exposition was a great undertaking by the civic leaders of that time and a great success. And it is the reason today that in the middle of our city, just a short distance from downtown, we have a sprawling 132 acres of park space to enjoy. By all accounts, the exposition was a catalyst for municipal park systems here and across the state. But despite its historic significance and its prominent location in our city, the monuments, historic architecture, and grounds of this park are in great need of improvement and repair. Today, I am announcing the formation of a committee to oversee the restoration of Centennial Park. The committee will be led by George Anderson, Chair of the Conservancy, and Chancellor Nick Zeppos of Vanderbilt, a neighbor to the park. He will serve as an honorary chair. Chancellor Zeppos was not able to join us here today, but I want to acknowledge Beth Fortune, who is here representing Nick. Thank you, Beth, for joining us. Every member of this committee is a community leader dedicated to making Centennial Park not only the signature park in Nashville, but also a model for great inner-city parks across the country. Stan Fossick, Chris Kuriopoulos, Professor Mitchell, Aubrey Harwell, Christine Kraling, and Ben Armstead, thank you for agreeing to serve. The committee's first order of business will be to issue a request for proposal for a master plan for Centennial Park. A plan will ensure that the park is restored and preserved for generations of future Nashvillians. It should take into account the park's rich history as well as its current and future uses. And I envision this plan to position Centennial Park as a leading example of sustainability as Nashville and our park system adapts to the environmental challenges ahead of us. I look forward to working with this committee in the months ahead and involving the public in this process so that the park's primary users, as well as the community at large, can have a voice in the future of our city's most well-known park. I now would like to invite everyone to join me and the committee members on a tour of some of the park's historic monuments. Kirk Garrigan is here from Metro Parks and Recreation to help narrate and lead the way. Again, thank you so much for being here. Congratulations to everyone. Thank you. All right, Kirk.
We'll start here at the John Thomas Monument. It was commissioned in 1906 by the NC&S, Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad. They asked the Park Board for permission to place a statue here in honor of John Thomas, who is the president and really the driving force behind the Centennial Exposition. So this monument was placed here in 1907. Over the years, there's been very little work to it. It used to have bushes all around it and really was hidden at one time. The light fixtures are not original. Some of the columns need to be replaced, and that's one of the things that we'll be working with the Conservancy on. The Women's Monument is the monument you see across the street. It was actually built in 1904 and had been placed elsewhere in the park at the location of the Women's Building. It was moved to this location in 1928. The area behind it has always been known as the Children's Area. That's the location of where the Children's Exposition was, the Children's Building during the Centennial Exposition. So the playgrounds have been changed over the years. These are about 5 years old, but they were put in the location of the Children's Area, traditional Children's Area. The Association of Confederate Soldiers asked permission and started planning a monument in 1903, and this was erected in this location in 1909 in honor of fallen Confederate soldiers. Starting back in 2002 or so, we started some improvements here, and many of you probably recall the parking lot that was right in the middle of the lawn here. That was removed, and the street system kind of reconfigured to allow for an outer loop, move the parking to the corners. We did the 1 mile walking path throughout the park, and really established what we call the Great Lawn for the Parthenon. which we hope will continue into the future. At this point, I wanted to introduce Randall Lance, who's done a lot of the landscaping work in Centennial Park. We also have along this route a tree tour, and we've got a brochure for that we've got labeled all the trees of different species throughout the park. So there's a lot to see throughout the park just along the walking path. This sculpture is actually known as the Shell Spring. It was built sometime between 1906 and 1912. It was not part of the original exposition. All of the area that you see down below here was Lake Catherine during the Centennial Exposition. It was filled in, and then this hump that you see going through here is actually a 108-inch brick sewer line that actually carries most of the sewer from West Nashville to downtown. It actually snakes through the park, crosses the street, and goes underneath the lobby of the Centennial Sportsplex and into the main sewer system. The reason that this is fenced is the upper part of the shell itself has deteriorated within the concrete. It's very similar to what happened to the Parthenon, is that the reinforcing bars rusted away, and so the concrete is not stable, and we were afraid people were going to start walking on it and it could collapse. So this is a restoration that we see as a priority in the upcoming years, and it will have to be rebuilt and hopefully be able to be a spring again and have the water feature come back through here. I'm not sure about the lake, but certainly the spring itself.
Is that Leonardo DiCaprio?
This is a replica of the gunboat Tennessee. It was actually accepted by the Park Board in 1910. This was an effort of Admiral Albert Gleaves to create a replica of the gunboat Tennessee here for Centennial Park. Interestingly, the original main entrance to the Centennial Park and the exposition came from Elliston Place. This was actually the main entrance. At the Lake Catherine that I mentioned earlier, there was a big water wheel at this bridge location. And we have an old photograph of that, and the original pavilion that welcomed people into the park. James Robertson Monument was placed in the park in 1903. The story is such that the granite shaft was actually displayed here during the exposition, but then returned, and then permission granted to place the monument in 1902, and it was dedicated in 1903. So, and then the tradition is that the top was always missing from the shaft. So it's not as if it has broken since it was placed. It's always been broken.
That's better than having it be solid copper and somebody ran off with it.
So it's actually in pretty good shape. There's some cleaning that needs to be done, and the bronze work can be cleaned off too, but it's one of the monuments that's in the better shape. The lake has evolved quite a bit over the course of time. During the exposition, if you look at some of the old photographs, there were many buildings right up against the lake, and it was actually a pretty hard edge. If you look at some of the photographs about 15 or 20 years later, it's very soft, there is no hard edge, and the bank goes right into the water with heavy vegetation with a lot of the same kind of trees that we've placed back in here. The banks apparently started to erode, and so about 20 years after that, they installed the stone wall to keep the water in and maintain the lake. Over the course of time, what had been kind of smaller vehicular paths became widened, and most of the east side of the lake from the 60s through the 90s was really a parking lot and a road. We moved the road down to another road that was existing but wasn't being used, and created kind of the walking path throughout the park, and based on some of the old photographs recreated a lot of the trees that were in place at the same locations. So, if we look at a photograph from 1925 in black and white, and then take a picture of this side of the lake looking at it now, you'll see that a lot of the same weeping willows are in the same places. So we've tried to be as true as possible to what had been the evolution of the park. We rebuilt all of the stone wall. It had actually kind of crumbled into the lake through the 90s and started back in about 2002 and rebuilt the wall all the way around. At the narrowest point here is where, if you look in the old photographs, a replica of the Rialto Bridge in Venice connected one side of the lake to the other. And you can now walk all the way continuously around the lake, which you couldn't do previously.
First step is to get a plan done, to bring in a top-notch designer to study the park, to restore it to its former glory, and then to take into account its current usages to develop a plan going forward. So it's going to be, what I envision is a very detailed plan that would take into account the history of this park, but also take into account what's been happening here for the last 25, 50 years of its current usage. That'd be the goal.